Hello, everyone. Welcome to Live on Air this Sunday evening. I've got with me Stuart Macadam and Dimi Nakov over in Perth. And I've also got a little prop. It's unusual for me to have any kind of prop. It was given to me by one of my daughter's partner for Father's Day. And it says, the first rule of life is, thou shalt not get fat. Uh, and I got to say that I broke every commandment, and I did get fat, and that's going to cost me dearly, I suspect. So our topic this evening is actually not about getting fat. It's probably the exact opposite for people that are starting out in cinema. They get thin because their projects are so time consuming. Their projects are so demanding, and it's always a case of, do we have the funding to be able to move this project forward? And of course, we've got two experts here. We've got the marketing guru of Cinemaddicts, the founder and CEO Stuart, and we've got Dimi as a filmmaker. And I wonder if I could begin with Dimi tonight. Just say a few words about yourself and the kind of genre that you're involved with filmmaking.
Hi, of course, my name is Dimi, and I'm basically a filmmaker who started as a photographer quite early on, and I basically like sci-fi. I like comedies as well. I like psychological thrillers, horror thrillers, sci-fi thrillers, the mega mix of thrillers and sci-fi and drama and horror. So the dark side, it's kind of prevailing in that aspect, but always looking towards the light and balance it quite well. So hopefully that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, that's a great beginning, Demi. I actually didn't know about your background in photography, and that will help to explain some of the questions that we're going to ask you a little bit later in the interview. Stuart, what's your background?
Yeah, I'm Stuart Macadam. I'm 24 years old. As David said, founder of the movies website Cinemaddicts. My background's primarily in marketing. I've worked with a lot of clients all over the world in different fields, including film, music, and some of the other things we'll be talking about tonight.
Okay, that's great. Now I'm going to put a question straight away, and I don't mind which of you answers it first. It is, if you were talking to a young person who is sort of getting interested in learning about movies, what kind of movie would you recommend that they go to sort of start to learn the craft? I mean, it can't be just one, but you may have a genre or whatever. So where would you direct someone to go if they wanted to start learning movie making?
Um, it's quite a wide, it's difficult question to answer, but also movie making is like life itself. You, like Stuart was saying, you have to live to learn how to do it and live it. In terms of a movie that might inspire or guide somebody, I think there's quite a few because like life itself, it's such a broad spectrum of lessons and techniques and storytelling aspects. I would say start from pretty much the beginning, from silent movies, Charlie Chaplin's, Buster Keaton's, then move towards Orson Welles, and then move towards the 90s with the big names like Steven Spielberg, James Cameron, Paul Verhoeven, and so on. And you find your own idols or teachers, mentors within particular genre. Also depends the background of the student, the person, the young filmmaker, the next generation storyteller, what kind of background they've been living in, and that will shape probably their likings and trends. So it's really broad to pinpoint it to one movie actually.
Yeah, I don't think we can go to one movie, but you said something really interesting in that, and that is you'd sort of push them back towards the
The
silent
beginning.
films. Yeah.
Yes.
Stuart, how about
The
you?
Yep.
I think a big interesting part of this all is to actually, when you go back from the beginning and what's happening moving forward, is that the nature of filmmaking itself is definitely changing. And what's normal today
Mm.
will be seen tomorrow as something which was done 20, 30 years ago, whenever it may be, when people look back on films such as like Guardians of the Galaxy, Inception, anything by Christopher
Mm.
Nolan, or like contemporary Steven Spielberg films. What he did in Jaws is very different to what he did in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the
Yeah.
Crystal Skull. So that in itself really does provide a lot of, I guess, inspiration, and also challenges people to think, how can we tell the story better? Because I think as you look
Mm.
at a lot of what Dimi's doing at the moment with Aura and this augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and virtual reality, that's going to have a huge
Mm.
influence on it.
Yeah, I think there's
Mm.
a huge growing market for this kind of augmented reality. And it was Dimi that put me onto that because I'm of a different generation to the two of you, and these terms
Ans-
all became kind of new. But I think it's fascinating that you would send them back to the silent films as part of the art of
yeah.
learning what a movie's about. And I
Yeah.
guess that, to me, would you say that somehow the image has to tell the story?
Yes. I would. And I'm learning still. By the way, I'm not an expert on those things, but I'm still learning the importance of image and telling stories with images a lot more than with dialogue and sound first and foremost, and then learn how to tell stories with sound, complementing the already developed techniques of telling stories with images. And I guess everyone learns differently, but even after a few years being involved in making short films and music videos and whatnot, I'm trying to go back and reset the timeline, my timeline that of learning, reset it and try to go from the start and see if I can pick up anything that I've missed the first time or the 100th time, because our lives as they go in a linear progression forward, we cannot travel backwards and repeat or change things. It's good to be able to somehow do that, and movies can help us with that by going backwards and finding out what we left off or missed off, because our experiences are changing, our point of view is changing, our filters of what is important and what it's not is changing over time, and the older we get, the more pick up, more, like you say, luggage we pick up, and that's knowledge as well as bad or good habits. So yeah, kind of hope that kind of answers what was the question.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer, Demi. Stuart, from your perspective, you have to deal with uh, dozens, if not hundreds, of movies, sort of flooding in, and provide reviews and reviewers, and trying to market those movies to your audience. What's the most important thing about marketing process? Is it to write a good text, or is it to use the images that the movie companies send out? How do you go about it?
I think the main thing you have to ask yourself, David, which would probably be commonplace, is if I was to go onto another website, would this be something that I'd enjoy having a look at? Is the review worthwhile? Does it convey what I want to know about the film? Does it tell the story? Does it say how good the actors are? Does it say anything about the cinematography, if it's like a documentary film or like one of those ones with lots of wide shot angles? When you start to explore that concept and side of it, you really begin to realize that a lot of the stuff that you yourself might think is interesting may not have the same appeal for a wider audience. And in terms of like personal
Yeah.
marketing, look, I worked with a filmmaker a while ago called Samuel Thomas, who made a film called Someone to Carry Me, and it was like a dramatic thriller. And one of our big focuses on that was to engage people straight away with the fact that we had a now pretty well-known actor from Spartacus called Gwendolyn Taylor. She was our big moving point in that, and also that we had some other great sort of high-intensity scenes that could really catch you straight away, so that even if people went for no other reason other than the fact that there's a bit of action, that was it. So I think narrowing in on those key points as to what exactly will engage someone straight away is probably the best way to, really engage them on marketing.
One of the things that strikes me from a somewhat different perspective, because I've been involved in making little YouTube movies now for a number of years. I think I started my YouTube channel in 2012, made about 6 little movies that had an audience of 1, me, and then gradually did more and more and more. And I was saying to Dimi that whereas he might start with the idea of images telling a story, and Stuart, I think you're saying from a marketing perspective, that also is pretty key. The images have to grab people. My whole working life has been around how do I grab people's attention from the point of view of saying a sentence. And when Dimi and I were doing a little bit of prior discussion this afternoon, it struck me that in the silent movies, often there would be a sort of a boilerplate, so it could only, one sentence and bingo. It kind of also helped to set the scene. And my latest YouTube movie, which Stuart has been very kindly marketing in Facebook for me, is called The Naked Theologian Asks, Does God Exist? Now, I've said before, and I'll say it again, that there's a whole art in writing a title. Unlike trying to market a whole movie, when you got something as tiny as a 120-second YouTube clip, your title has to grab the attention every bit as much as the image. But I'm going to. This is where I think I can contribute meaningfully to the discussion. I want to just tell you the genesis of that project. When you make movies in YouTube, I was making them that they could be anywhere between 4 minutes and 40 minutes. The less I had to say, the longer I took to say it.
I think one of the greatest things from my side of the coin is that throughout the ages there have been a lot of fantastic films which have been made by a host of different filmmakers. If you look to the early days, Dimi mentioned him, Charlie Chaplin, you've got Alfred Hitchcock, you've got Steven Spielberg, George Lucas with his revolutionary Star Wars trilogy, which were absolutely amazing, and to some of the more contemporary filmmakers like Christopher Nolan, Sofia Coppola, also her father back in the day, Francis Ford Coppola, also made some wonderful movies. And the way in which they were constantly pushing the boundaries and the different ways in which they were, looking to make the whole filmmaking and film viewing experience a great one was incredible. Another great person I would say to add in there is James Cameron. Ever since his brilliant first Terminator film, he's just been an absolute revelation in the film industry. And now with what he did with Avatar and also the upcoming Avatar movies, I think he'll have lifted the bar again for all filmmakers out there.
Interesting that you both mentioned Charlie Chaplin. Now, Charlie Chaplin had this sort of sense of humour. What do you guys think about humour in terms of filmmaking and that process?
Oh, look, it's a fantastic way to get people engaged in the thing which you're talking about. I find that a lot of modern superhero movies love using humour because when people can tell a good joke or, use general humour, it's a fast way to attract attention and get people to like you a bit more. Sometimes these, you get annoying, irritating characters and then they can just pull out that one-liner and bang, you've instantly engaged and captivated.
Hooked. Yeah, comedy is is the one, I would say, true representation of our society through a different set of glasses or lenses, I would call it. It really shows, like Stuart was saying, it's very easy to catch or captivate, hook the audience, keep them for longer, because laughter is the one thing, I guess, we as a species or as a society underestimate quite a bit or don't concentrate as much as we should. And it's in terms of making comedies, they are one of the most difficult to achieve to the level that you can call it a masterful or an excellent representation of the genre. I love Charlie Chaplin, like we already agreed, and Buster Keaton as a comedian, he was unbelievable. Understood the power of editing and composition of his shots. Then you get comedians like Peter Sellers with Pink Panther, Bud Spencer and Terence Hill, cowboy or a duo, comedic duo that I grew up with, and I can't stop watching it. Comedy is essential. Of course, we can't have movies only with comedy, so it's good to have variety and diversity like anything else in life.
I tend to agree with you, but the problem for YouTube movie makers is that the whole genre is devoted to what their cat did that was
Yeah.
comic, and unfortunately, one would have to say that there is a small percentage of not so very good movies made in the comic genre. So when you get someone that's got truly gifted sense of timing, that can put together either a witty script or a witty set of visual images, yeah, it's fantastic. And I'm glad you mentioned Peter Sellers, because I think the Pink Panther films were simply, everyone just rolled on the floor
films.
in laughter. Yeah.
And then you have Mr. Bean, right?
Though it would be fair to say, wouldn't it, Dimi, that and Stuart, that Mr. Bean can very quickly become a bit laboured.
Yeah.
And a tendency to be often repetitive, whereas with the Pink Panther, you often found that although Clouseau was this bumbling detective, he often managed to pull something out of the hat which was completely original, and that just comes down to the creative genius of Peter Sellers.
Let me ask you guys a totally left of field question. I spent most of my working life dealing with some fairly somber occasions, funerals. I've buried a lot of people over decades. The comic aspect of burying people is one of the parts of cinema that I laugh the hardest. Sometimes there are classic scenes where something goes wrong at the graveside, and the audience is in stitches. Let me tell you, a friend of mine was relating, he and an Anglican priest were doing a funeral jointly, and they had gone out to the cemetery at Waikamete over in West Auckland, and the Anglican guy was fully robed. You know how they have layer upon layer of robing, etc. And it was a very windy day, and he stretched his arms out with his robes like this in a gust of wind. And I really wish I'd been there to film. And another vicar, a very famous guy called Bob Lowe, that used to write a thing called Life is Like That, described when the first digital watches came out and they had their alarms set. And he was taking a funeral. I did a few funerals in my time, but he did a fantastic number of weddings and funerals. And he told this very funny story. He had just finished his speech about the person that died when they heard quite distinctly through the coffin the electronic alarm go off. And his wife, without missing a beat, said, "Oh, it must be time for his pills." So I think sometimes that the comic side is really an integral
Mm,
part. It is a part of life, isn't it? And
Mm,
the filmmaker
yeah.
and the movie marketeer that can capture that
mm.
really is onto a winner. And that, I guess, is why the internet
Mm,
is full of comedies.
I would say quite quickly, if you have a look at a lot of movie trailers, right throughout the years, ever since they became a fashionable thing to screen before movies started, a lot of the time, humor is used as an element to draw people in and attract their attention and actually get them to say, wow, this actually might be a pretty good movie because even though it might be
yeah.
the only funny line in the film, people will still put it in there anyway just to engage people. And
Yeah.
it's the most clever form of marketing out there. If you can have a funny line in your trailer, you're guaranteed to hook people in.
Does the reverse hold true too? That if you can get the emotion of compassion or love
Mm.
or sadness into the movie,
Or fear.
you've also won a winner.
Yes, yes. On the flip side, emotion, no matter if it's love, laughter, or fear or sadness, emotion is the fundamental engagement or trigger for us humans or for people to either like, dislike, or get interested with something. So, a movie, let's say horrors, for example, they will feed on your on unexpected or scary moments or on the fear, and some of them introduce a little bit of humor. Depends on what it is at the end of the day, but. Emotion is the thing. As long as a movie offers an emotional roller coaster, depending on which spectrum of the genre it rides, it will capture and hold the audience attention, which, like you mentioned earlier, the attention span is quite short these days because it's abundance of material. It doesn't matter if it's good or not. There is still a lot of out there, thousands of hours done on YouTube every minute or so.
Yeah.
Mm.
One of the things that Stuart has got me involved with is reviewing documentaries, and
Mm.
I've got to say this is an area that I love, and I think the movie maker's art is kind of it's both harder and it's gentler at the same time. A documentary can be
Yeah.
very, very hard hitting about some
Mm.
horrible issues, but equally it proceeds in a more leisurely way than if I was reading an article in the newspaper or online or listening to a radio report or
Mm.
watching a television. So that's another genre that I think in movie making documentary can elicit emotion or feeling responses just as much as
Mm.
in a work of fiction.
It's also a great opportunity for first-time filmmakers to really get a foot into the door through
Yeah.
documentary filmmaking. If you have a look at the general budgets which you have to work with in it, they usually tend to be quite a bit lower than what like a sci-fi or a action movie would be, in that you can go and do a lot of the investigative work yourself, and a lot of the
Mm.
people that are like the experts on a particular topic, say if it's about like weight loss, for example, you'll find many people who would be happy to talk to you about it without any additional charge at all, which is very different
Mm.
from, I guess, hiring actors and staffs and production crews. So, and if you have a
Mm.
look at the way that filmmaking is changing, it's the whole viewing experience itself is transitioning away from one of people just going to the cinema all the time and watching, to becoming very popular with online streaming with platforms such as Netflix and Lighthouse, and also as well with YouTube too. So I think the opportunity for people to get going and establish tens of thousands of views is to go and pick out a topic which they think is actually very interesting from a documentary point of view, and just put a bit of
Mm.
effort and devotion into it, because it would be their best possible insight into the whole process of filmmaking without the huge pressures and demands of actually moving a whole cast and crew around.
Yeah, one of the
Yeah.
things that when we were originally going to shoot this, and I put everyone into the wrong meeting room, and ended up speaking on YouTube by myself for 40 minutes about making a movie, which was a fascinating experience. But what I wanted to be able to get across on that occasion, couldn't, but the two of you here would be able to say to any congregation or volunteer group, it could be the local scout group, it could be the rugby club, it could be a group that's there to um, support Alzheimer's research or whatever. Making a documentary about the work you do is probably going to hone your sense of vision and purpose
Yes.
far more than doing anything else. And it's amazing to me how reluctant most church groups are to do this. It's almost like they've switched off to one of their most potent ways of telling their own story. How do you feel about what I've just said?
Well, I can kind of without knowing much about it, I can summarize it with a quote. If you're expecting a different result by doing something the same way you've done it before, you're doing it the wrong way. So, or the quote is something like that. So if you're expecting a different result, you have to change. Yeah, yeah. So at the end of the day, like you said, using video or documenting, visually expressing a congregation or a church purpose or activities or certain angles of audiences or they want to attract. The best way is, like you said, to create a documentary type short videos and engage with their potential audience and congregation to give them something, like you said, on the go, because with the mobile devices and iPads, people will be able to watch it whenever, as long as you have a platform to host it on. So if you're expecting a different result, you better change your approach as well.
Yeah, that's great advice to end with. I'd like to say thank you both very much for coming back and having another go at this topic. And thanks very much to the watching audience. It's always great to be able to have to perform to a live audience and then put the thing up on Facebook, etc.